Hey everybody, Ty McDuffey here, coming to you live from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I recently took a 36-hour road trip from here down in the southern corner of New Mexico and went all the way up to Kansas and Missouri, Midwest area. While I was on that drive, I decided to make the most of my time by listening to a couple audiobooks. So I'm going to break down each of those books for you and the takeaways that I had just off the top of my mind. And hopefully you guys can take some information away from it as well. The first book that I read was called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's by a guy named John Gray. And essentially the book emphasizes that men and women are inherently different in a couple different ways, in our communication styles, in our love languages, in the ways that we want to give and receive love. Men, at our nature, we are problem solvers. So we try to fix things. We often go into our mind and we need a lot of alone time to solve issues, familial issues, job issues, whatever it might be. Whenever we get relaxed, we also want to have alone time. It's how we unwind. Whereas women, more often, in my opinion, and also in the author's opinion, want to express their feelings and talk through them. So one of the things I've been guilty of, and I'm sure many of the men watching are the same way, whether in your relationships with your family or with your significant other, is whenever a woman is talking to you, she really just wants to be heard and understood. And for men, one of the ways that we mess up is we'll take her coming to us with a problem, when in all actuality, all she wants to do is just vent and be listened to and be understood. And we'll try to solve that problem. For example, if your wife were to come home and say, I just had a super long day at work. My boss was yelling at me. I'm not getting paid enough. I don't feel appreciated. The typical male response would be, well, you should just quit that job. Women are oftentimes not looking for an answer or a solution to their problems. They just want you to listen and to understand and be present. Oftentimes that's going to go over a lot better with your woman, with your significant other, or with your family members who are women than if you try to solve all of their problems and put on your Mr. Fix-It hat. It doesn't work that way. Conversely, the male ego is very, 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 very fragile. So one of the most damaging things that a woman can do to a man is to question him, to make him feel like he is untrusted, to make it feel like he is not capable of doing whatever the task may be, or that his skills are not up to par. This can be seriously damaging for relationships and also for the male ego, because in the male world and in the dominance hierarchy, we're structured essentially in accordance with our competencies. I'll give you an example. If a couple was driving down the road in their car and the man was maybe lost, it could be perceived as damaging to his ego if his partner were to say, "Are you sure you know where you're going? Do you need some help?" Men oftentimes do not want that type of help. They want to be able to figure things out on their own. They want to be able to show and establish their competencies. And the book emphasizes that this is something that women should realize. Allow your man to figure it out on his own. Make him feel trusted. Allow him to have the feeling of being the provider, of feeling competent, and that'll really help the relationship out a lot. The next book that I read is called The Book of Five Rings. It's by a man named Musashi, and he was a samurai around in the 1600s. This book's a little bit harder to understand if you listen to the original version like I did, because it's essentially a treatise on how to kill another person, how to overcome another man in battle. So a lot of it has to do with sword fighting technique and the different ways that you can cut a person. But it's essentially a book about discipline, about training, about being in the right place at the right time. And some of the takeaways are that the way is in training, that continuous practice is the way to master any skill. Obviously, that comes in with the 10,000 hour rule that maybe some of you are familiar with. It comes from a book called Outliers that suggests that the way to mastery in any skill is to put in 10,000 hours. Another thing that the Book of Five Rings emphasizes is not to waste your time. We have a very limited time on this earth. So if you have a goal or something that you want to accomplish, that time is precious and you cannot afford to squander it. Another thing that this book emphasizes is that you should understand how to use multiple weapons. This may not be as applicable to all of our daily lives as it was to a swordsman, a samurai in the 1600s, but it is still a valuable insight and information because it can be translated in different ways. Understanding how to use different weapons in a broader sense can be translated as know how to use the tools of your trade. Stay up to date on the newest technology in whatever field or profession you have chosen. And even stay up to date on how to use weapons, guns, fighting. All of these things are especially helpful for men, especially helpful for the male ego and confidence levels. So that is still something that's relevant about 500 years after this guy died, and it's pretty crazy that his text is still around for all of us to read. Really cool there. Another thing that this guy Musashi emphasizes is that preparation is key. I think he went undefeated in 60 or 61 straight duels. And that might not sound like a lot, but you have to go back in time and realize that this guy was actually sword fighting people to the death. So to win 60 of those in a row means that he escaped unscathed and killed who knows if it was 60 or 10 or 20 or 30 of his opponents. But these guys were oftentimes fighting to the death in their duels. So he had to be super prepared at all times, super focused and disciplined at all times. And this applies for any situation in the modern world, whether it's battle, whether it's going to the gym, whether it's business. Preparation is key. That's pretty self-explanatory. The next book that I listened to is called The Millionaire Next Door, and this is getting into some of the financial books that I took a listen to. The Millionaire Next Door is by Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danko. So shout out to those guys. They wrote a really great, informative book. There are a couple of different takeaways and things that I think the world needs to hear from this book. These guys, the authors, took all of the data from the IRS and compiled it and did a study on the millionaire population of America. Obviously, the IRS has the most information on millionaires and finances, really more than any other agency or business out there. So they had a lot of good data that they were able to pull and really break down who are the millionaires in America, what are their qualities, what do they do. And the first thing they talk about is that most millionaires accumulate wealth by spending less, not earning more. This is essentially living below your means. And I was a little shocked to learn about this. Not that I should have been, but our American consumer culture kind of pushes the idea that if you're rich, you can afford whatever you want. You can wear whatever clothes you want. You can drive whatever car you want. You can live in whatever house you want at whatever location. And that the way to essentially be wealthy and show your wealth is to have all sorts of possessions, all sorts of belongings, and that those are the rich people. It's actually not the case. The book suggests avoiding buying those types of status objects and indicates that true wealth is about accumulation. It's not about flashy possessions. Those things are called liabilities. There are things called assets and things called liabilities. Assets are things that you have at the end of the month that put more money into your pocket. These things can be stocks, bonds, etc. Liabilities are things that take money out of your pocket. This would be a car payment, your rent, things like that, your mortgage. So it advises you to take a look at what your assets and liabilities are and suggests that the majority of millionaires actually have accumulated their wealth by being frugal, by taking what they have left over at the end of the month, and instead of spending it on status objects, reinvesting it or saving it. The other thing that millionaires do is they are extremely financially independent and free in that regard. Something like 80 to 85% of millionaires in America own their own business. So that appears to be the way to wealth in this country, is to own your own business, to be in control of your time in that regard, and not be working for someone else, being self-employed. Another thing, most millionaires, according to this book, work on average 59 hours a week and are extremely wise investors. So work hard and work smart. There's no way around hard work, especially when it comes to financial success and financial independence. And the millionaire population certainly shows that. I mean, that's almost 60 hours a week. So if you calculate that into 5 days, Monday through Friday, that's about an average of a 12-hour workday. That's above the standard 40 hours a week, the standard 8-hour workday that a lot of people work. So if you want to be a millionaire, you got to put in extra time. And it's not about how much you make, but about how much you keep. Millionaires are often meticulous budgeters, bargain shoppers, and this book suggests that most millionaires are couples that have been together for about 50 years. I think the average millionaire was someone who was in their 50s or 60s and had been married to their spouse for decades. And that the dynamic between the man and the woman, or spouses, whichever way you want to go with it, is they're both frugal. It doesn't work if one spouse is a spender and the other one is a saver. It has to be a team effort. The budget has to be a team effort in families. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to accumulate wealth, not going to be able to get on the same page about these things. And that's super important, and one thing the book stresses a couple of times over. The other thing is wealthy families teach their children to create and maintain wealth. The average span that family money lasts is about 2 generations. That's not a long time. That's my grandkids. So in order to prevent a squandering of a fortune within a family, many millionaires and wealthy families teach and stress financial education. That should come as no shock. Most millionaires also own their homes and stay in them for a long, long time. They aren't the people who buy a house and then move out of it every 3 years. They, on average, bought a house for a good price, stayed in it for about 10 years or longer, and allowed that equity in their home to increase and increase and increase. Most millionaires also have not bought a new car in 10 years. Think about that. This is IRS data. This completely goes against the culture that we see in American consumerism, against the culture that you see on Instagram, against the culture that you see on TV. The average millionaire does not spend their money like that. They're not interested in flashy objects. They're not interested in status symbols. They know that it's about accumulating wealth. Accumulating wealth. That is how you get rich. It's not about how much you bring in, and it's not about how many objects or possessions or status symbols you have. At the end of the day, your true wealth and your net worth is directly tied into how much money you accumulate and how much you're able to hang on to at the end of the day. So that financial independence is really tied into not following the crowd, not doing the thing that everybody else does, which I think in a lot of cases is school and going to work for someone else, getting a good job with a pension or a 401k. It's really about taking risks to get to financial independence. So that's the summary of The Millionaire Next Door. Really good book. I highly recommend it. The next book is called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the guy's name who wrote it. Robert Kiyosaki. Hopefully that's right. But this is another financial book. It's a bestseller. Really, really good. I can't recommend it enough. There are a couple of takeaways from this one. First off, Kiyosaki says that the rich don't work for their money. I'll explain what he means by this. The rich focus on acquiring assets that make money for them, because it's very difficult to have wages that are high enough to get you rich. You need to have passive income. You need to have your money work for you. Financial education is also the key, according to the author of this book. He says that education and life experiences are the most important thing when it comes to financial health and financial knowledge and literacy. So seeking out different ways to become financially literate, whether that's audiobooks, YouTube videos, courses, speaking with a mentor, that part of financial literacy is really stressed in the book. And tying into the Millionaire Next Door, Rich Dad, Poor Dad also emphasizes owning your own business. So these are now two really, really highly recommended books that emphasize the importance of owning your own business. That should be a key for all of us who are interested in financial longevity and financial freedom. This book also talks about the power of corporations in the corporate structure because they provide tax advantages. I'm pulling this number off the top of my head, but the stat was something like some of the richest people in America pay under 10% of their net worth in taxes every year, whereas the lower and middle class are pushing upwards of about a third of their total net worth in taxes every year. That's often because there are a lot of tax advantages and protections that come with corporations and LLCs that people are just not taking advantage of in their own personal tax returns and filings. So I am not an accountant and I am not a financial advisor, but I would suggest everyone go and look at the tax write-offs that your business or your company might be entitled to and find ways to take advantage of it, because the rich in this country, the upper class, do pay less of their total net worth in taxes through some of these write-offs and through some of these tax advantages. The next lesson in this book is the importance of investing, because it allows you to make your money work for you. And Kiyosaki mentions that he is more of an aggressive investor, pushing for things that give him 16% return on investment. I'm not sure what out there will give a 16% yield. I think normal Roth IRAs and accounts like that are somewhere like 8% if you put your money into a Vanguard account. So take that for what you will. But he does emphasize that stocks, bonds, things like that we can invest in will provide passive income streams, and that can serve you well in the long run. The other thing that he mentions is work to learn. Don't work for money. Again, that gaining skills is more important in the long run than earning a salary. So it's okay to take jobs in marketing and sales, things like that, where you are learning and acquiring new skills, which will benefit you and increase your net worth and your total earnings over the long run, as opposed to just taking a job because it pays the highest. It's something that's kind of counterintuitive, but I can see where it would be beneficial. Next, the book emphasizes overcoming obstacles, mostly the obstacles that we put in the way of ourselves. Excuse that voice crack there, but some of those things that we get in the way of ourselves: fear, cynicism, laziness, bad spending habits, and arrogance. These things prevent people from becoming truly wealthy, and they have to be overcome. It appears that a lot of becoming wealthy comes down to discipline and being able to control yourself. Yeah, and another thing, the book kind of ends with giving back. The rich often build their wealth and give it back to society. I don't know if you believe in karma. I certainly do. Or just a general mindset of abundance. But giving back to the community, finding ways to help out people who are less fortunate than you or me or society as a whole. That's something that the rich do partake in. That's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The next book is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F by Mark Manson. This book was kind of confusing to me at first because the title obviously is what it is. Do you really want to not give a f about things? But that's not what the book's about at all. It's more about choosing what you care about. Life is about choices, according to this book, and to be efficient and goal-oriented, we have to decide what really matters and put our energy into that rather than getting caught up in trivial concerns. So I think The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, that's a title that is meant to sell, meant to grab your attention, but what I just gave you is what the book is essentially about. And Mark Manson in this book talks about acceptance of negative experiences because they often can turn into positives. We have to accept life's difficulties. Everyone is going to go through hard times in their life. But embracing those negative experiences as part of life's journey, rather than always striving for your life to be perfect or positive, can lead to a more rounded life and a life that is not as full of disappointment. The next thing Manson talks about is taking responsibility. We have to take responsibility for our actions, take responsibility for the way that we react to the events that come into our lives, even if they're not our fault, even if we are not to blame for them. How we respond to things is definitely more important than the challenge itself, because we always have a choice to control our thoughts. We always have a choice to choose our next steps, our next moves, and that's more important than the challenges that life throws at you, according to Manson. Another thing that he emphasizes that's kind of funny is this concept that you are not special. I am not special. Manson demystifies this notion that everyone has a uniquely designed path for greatness. And he encourages us to recognize that we're just the same as everyone else, and that this can be liberating and drive us to work harder for the things that we want. So you are not special. A big part of the book as well. He also goes into the value of suffering, and he emphasizes that struggle and suffering are clarifying and strengthening, and that they help us understand what is truly important. And I definitely agree with that. Struggle and suffering can be very valuable tools to find out what you want, what you don't want, but they also build a lot of mental toughness. They build a lot of character. They give you life experiences, and a life without challenge, a life without pain, a life without suffering is definitely not a life worth living, in my opinion. Manson also encourages us to reject our entitlements. He suggests that believing that you deserve to have a good life without working for it is self-defeating. And that hard work and struggle are the goals that you get. Let me put that a little clearer. There's a phrase that goes something like the journey is the destination. Maybe I'm butchering that, and I hope you understand what I'm saying, but Manson essentially says that hard work and struggle are what give value to your achievements. Knowing the work that you put in, being proud of yourself for coming to point A to point B, that is really important. He also asks us in this book to embrace uncertainty, to be comfortable with not knowing all the answers at all times, and that to embrace that for personal growth. He promotes this acceptance of uncertainty. It's kind of a tongue twister, acceptance of uncertainty, as a means to discover new opportunities and new solutions. I can certainly think of a lot of times in my life, I'm sure you can as well, where you were uncertain, or you had a feeling in the pit of your stomach where you just didn't know what the next move was going to be. But these feelings are fleeting, and in a year or two, it's easy to look back on that time in life and realize that it actually doesn't matter that much long term. And that's super freeing and liberating. Manson in this book also emphasizes the value of honesty and vulnerability, and that authenticity is a strength, that being vulnerable and honest are not weaknesses, that they are in fact strength, and that being honest with ourselves and with others about our flaws and limitations and areas that we need to grow help us to be stronger people, essentially. And the last chapter of the book, and I'll wrap this video up with this message, is that death should be your motivator. It might be a bit of a morbid message, but there's a saying that you should keep death on your shoulder at all times. I heard that from the great Duncan Trussell, one of my favorite comedians and philosophers. But Manson in this book talks about the inevitability of death, something that we cannot escape. It's coming for all of us, and it's coming at a time that you cannot predict. We cannot predict when we will die. So there has to be a sense of urgency to live a meaningful and memorable life. That acknowledging our mortality can help us to prioritize our experiences and our relationships and sort out our values that are actually significant and important to us personally. So that's my video on the 5 books that I read over a 36-hour road trip. Hopefully I explained this in a way that gave you a little bit of clarity or helped you to think about some things in your life. This is my new channel. I also run a channel called Duff Radio, which is more involved in music and things of that nature, podcasts and interviews. So if you want to subscribe to that, I'll put the link in the description of this video. But for now, I think that'll do for this summary of those 5 books. Hope you take something away from this video. And as always, thank you for watching.